What is marriage? It seems like such an obvious thing that we wouldn't even need to discuss it. Everyone knows what marriage is, and yet there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding around it, even from Christian people. I've had young men and women use the excuse that because they love each other and because they're very committed to each other, that it's okay to be physically intimate with one another, or so on and so forth, because we're going to get married anyway. We're basically married in the eyes of God. And they might use a passage like 1 Corinthians chapter 6, where the Apostle Paul says that if a man goes into an harlot, the two become one flesh. So there is something about the one flesh union, the physical intimate union between a man and a woman, that does bind a man and a woman together. There's no doubt about that. I believe that's biblical. That's how you consummate the vows. That's how you consummate your marriage together. But probably one of the best definitions that I've heard comes from a guy named Timothy Keller. I might read one of his quotes a little bit later here as well. But he's got a book called The Meaning of Marriage. And there's a lot of good stuff in there, like there is in a lot of other good books. But he says that marriage is basically a permanent, public, exclusive commitment to one another. Something along those lines. I may not be quoting it exactly. But you're promising before God and before witnesses that no matter what comes, I'm going to stay faithful to this person right here. So it's not like a contract. I just recently signed a contract for a cell phone. I'm leasing a cell phone. And if I find another company that provides me a better service, I might just drop this contract and move to another. But in a contract, I might look out for number one. I might try to read the fine print and make sure that this contract is going to be suitable to me. If I'm making a business deal with someone and I have a contract given to me that I have to sign, I better look over that fine print at the bottom of the page to see, am I going to be giving up more than I realize on this contract? Am I going to be perhaps throwing in the towel in a bunch of areas that I didn't realize? I thought we were just doing a business transaction. I give you this service, you give me this money, but you've come to realize that they're expecting this of you and that of you and the other thing. And you have to go through those contracts with a fine-tooth comb and cross out certain things and say, no, this is not something I'm committed to. I'm not interested in this. If that's what it takes, I'm not interested. That's a contract. A covenant is different. A covenant is something where in a contract, if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, the deal might be off. If you don't pay your bills, if you don't provide the service on time, the contract is null and void, and you can go back to the drawing board and everything's terminated from there on out. But that's not what a covenant is like. In a covenant, you're vowing publicly to stay faithful, committed to one person for life, forever, no matter what. The vows that we often repeat at weddings, in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad, whether we're rich or poor, it doesn't matter. Whatever comes my way, whatever comes our way, I am promising to love you forever. And so to use this excuse that, well, we're really committed to each other, we really like each other a lot, and then to go ahead and do the deed, so to speak, and make yourselves one flesh, is not the biblical type of covenant that we speak of. The biblical covenant is me coming before God and before witnesses and promising to the world around me. When people show up to a wedding ceremony, they're just as much a part of the vow ceremony as the couple is themselves, because these two people before God are promising, and before all the people, that we're going to stay faithful to one another. So the man should be held accountable by his friends, especially his groomsmen. The bride should be held accountable, especially by her bridesmaids, if you have those types of traditional weddings. You're promising before God and before witnesses that I will stay faithful in sickness and in health, good times and bad, no matter what. And so if you haven't done that yet, you're taking advantage of your future wife, hopefully. Maybe it'll be someone else's future wife if you end up not getting married. And you're taking advantage of a physical thing that was designed to fit into a perfect slot. Once two people have committed their lives to one another, they've promised before God and before witnesses, then there's supposed to be a physical consummation that binds those two people, makes their two flesh into one flesh, physically, literally, spiritually, emotionally, and all those good things. And so if you don't find your needs being met in a marriage, you do your duty anyway, because you promised to stay faithful no matter what. And that's not just if she stays faithful also. Now, there are some rare exceptions, even in the Bible, for divorce, and I won't be getting into those. I'm talking about the beauty of marriage. And in almost every case, if a man or a woman commits to the vows that they have made, a marriage can be made to work, and it can become beautiful. And I won't speak to your particular situation. Maybe some exceptions are in this congregation of people listening online right now. I don't know. But yes, so marriage begins with romance, typically. Usually a couple kind of falls in love, or in many, many cultures. I heard just recently that over half, it was about 40%, I think, of marriages, even to this day, are prearranged marriages. So they don't begin with romance. But I would imagine even in most of those cases, when they finally end up with each other, there's romance, there's giddiness, there's excitement, there's infatuation. And a lot of marriages would never get kickstarted if there wasn't that infatuation phase. In fact, if my wife and I knew everything about each other that we knew at year 10, the very first day we got together, we might never have gotten married. So the infatuation, the romanticism, the excitement about each other's bodies and excitement about each other's character and abilities and all that, it needs to be there to get the ball rolling. And then it becomes truly beautiful, truly through long suffering, patience, and continued decisions to love one another in spite of your feelings. So when people date for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then end up breaking up and finding another boyfriend, girlfriend, and then dating for another 2 or 3, 4 years, and then break up, it's obvious to me, because every marriage will go through something like that. You begin with the infatuation period, you get real excited about each other, and then you get to know each other, and they get to know you, and you realize we're not that special, we're not that unique. Whereas when you're in the infatuation stage, you think the world of the other person, and they could never make a mistake. If you think your future partner, if you're dating a boyfriend or a girlfriend, if you think they're perfect, all you have to do is go and ask their younger brother or their younger sister, is this girl perfect? This younger brother, who has a completely different perspective than you do, will see all of their flaws, will know how annoying they are, how difficult they can be, how messy they can be, how ugly they can get, so on and so forth. Your potential future spouse is not perfect. And so as you get married, you spend time in every way possible becoming completely open and vulnerable to each other. You're going to know each other and know each other well. So though it begins with romance, and romance can stay alive, and it should stay alive in a marriage that's done well, the true, deep, abiding love comes from continued decisions to love each other in spite of how you feel. Many times you will do something out of commitment to your vow and to your spouse and to your well-being as a couple that you might not feel like at the moment, but it ends up resulting in a lot of good feelings. This is the case for almost anything that you might love. If you love piano, there's probably days when you don't love practicing, but you put in the time and the effort anyway, and eventually it becomes a beautiful, harmonious thing that works very well for you, right? So this is this case with all things. See, when you get married, you're laying aside your personal liberties, your personal freedoms, in order to enjoy the liberty and beauty of a covenant marriage. And so you're laying aside your personal rights, your personal freedoms to commit to another person, and now you're bound, but there's beauty in that binding. So one of the quotes that I want to read from Timothy Keller here, he says this: "When over the years someone has seen you at your worst and knows you with all your strengths and flaws, and yet commits him or herself to you wholly, it is a consummate experience. To be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. To be loved but not really truly known is comforting, but it's kind of superficial." No offense to young dating couples, this is kind of the case. Your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend does not truly know you yet until they've spent a long time with you. So it's comforting, but it is a little bit superficial. Then he goes on to say, "To be known and not loved is our greatest fear." Right? We don't want to be known, but then not loved for being known. But to be fully known and to be truly loved is, well, it's a lot like being loved by God, he says. It is what we need more than anything else. It liberates us from pretense, humbles us out of our self-righteousness, and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us. And that's from Timothy Keller, The Meaning of Marriage. I'd highly recommend that book if you love the gospel and are married. It's a beautiful comparisons between Christ and the church. You know, the book of Ephesians chapter 5, the most famous passage on marriage in the Bible, it talks about what a husband and wife roles are supposed to be like. The husband's this, the wife does this, and do this to one another. I won't get into all those things. And then he says, I'm speaking in a mystery, because really I was speaking about Christ and the church. And so the idea of Christ covenanting himself with his bride, giving himself up for his bride and loving her in spite of how he felt about her, in spite of how far failing she was, how many failures and shortcomings and sin she had, which is us, the church, the bride of Christ, he gave himself anyway. You know, there's a passage in Philippians. It's meant to teach us how to do any relationship in the church, but none more importantly, I would believe, than marriage itself. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 says this, "Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves." Well, what does that mean? There's nothing in marriage or in any relationship to be done in strife or in vainglory. Trying to esteem myself, trying to lift myself up above another, trying to prove myself right while I prove the other wrong. Look not every man to his own things, but every man also on the things of others. This is description of love. This is what love actually is. This is what marriage constitutes, an actual marriage. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. So here's God in heaven. He could be in heaven, but he comes down to the earth. It's not robbery for him to be equal with God, and yet it says he made himself of no reputation. And he took upon himself the form of a servant and was made in the likeness of men. Being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. So marriage will expose all your faults. It will expose all your weaknesses, and that's a good thing. You need someone in this world to love you even when they see your faults. As long as things are going well in an infatuation state, whether you're married, dating for 2 or 3 years and it's really exciting and infatuating, or you get married in the first year or two, are these cloud nine kind of experiences, those things will come to an end, and then your true self will be revealed. The deep self, the vulnerable being that you are. And so he says, or it says here that, what I want to say is that marriage will expose you. It will reveal your true self more than anything else in this world, because you'll never live as intimately with anyone else besides the person who sees you first thing in the morning, last thing at night, who sees your comings and your goings. They will know everything about you. This is what being vulnerable means. You will become naked and open before each other's eyes. And that's obviously physically, emotionally, spiritually. You will not be able to fool them. They will know if you are being pretentious or fake or in any way facetious or pharisaical, rather. The gospel is God knowing you better than anyone will ever know you and then loving you nonetheless. Marriage is that. Marriage is me seeing all of my wife's flaws and knowing every failure that she has and then standing by her side no matter what. It is her knowing how selfish I can be, how ornery I can get, how messy I can be, how sloppy I can be, and so on and so forth. And then her saying, I am fully committed to this man. I'm going to love him till death do us part, and I will never leave him nor forsake him. That's exactly what the gospel says to us. You are miserable. You are sinful. Even when you become a Christian, you still have so many flaws, so many hang-ups, so much selfishness, so much sin ranging around in your life that if God were to depart from you based on your lifestyle and based on your offensiveness to him, he would never stay with you. But in the gospel, he says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. He will never let us go. That's what marriage is. It is promising before God and witnesses, the way God promised before God and witnesses that he was going to give himself for his bride, and he did just that. and one day he's coming to gather us to himself, and there will be a great wedding feast, and so on and so forth. But that's basically what marriage is. It's publicly committing permanently to be faithful to one another till death do us part. And all kinds of things are going to get thrown at you, every which way. And if your marriage is falling apart, men in particular, I would say, it's your responsibility. It may not be your fault. The problems may not have stemmed from you. It might be her upbringing. It might be the way that she reacted to certain things. It might be something that she did to you. But because you are considered to be the head of the wife, as the Apostle Paul puts it, you are responsible for the marriage. So if things are falling apart, you can't say, well, she's just like that. Oh, she's just like this. You are the one that has to take the onus, take the responsibility and say, I'm going to pursue my wife. I'm going to make this thing right. I'm going to go get counseling if need be. I'm going to do whatever it takes. If you are being prideful while your marriage is falling apart, no matter how sinful your wife is, you're the one that's ultimately responsible for it. And so it doesn't necessarily get easier, but as you see your wife's or your husband's commitment to you extend to all ends, it becomes more and more of a beautiful thing. And it can be extremely beautiful. I've seen marriages, at 15, 20, 30 years just become glorious, and I've seen them also become miserable. And it's not the way that it ought to be. If I think we understand love correctly, go read 1 Corinthians 13. It's not necessarily meant for a wedding ceremony, but it's a beautiful description of what true charity is. And then Philippians chapter 2, like I read there to you, it's not esteeming yourself over their concerns. So husbands are giving themselves to knowing what their wife's needs are and trying to meet those needs and loving her, and vice versa. We're all trying to outdo each other by caring for the other more than they care for us. That's what love is. You commit to it. And now feelings will come. Feelings do come and go. I think Timothy Keller probably also said that if you're in an unhappy relationship right now, statistically, they did some studies on this, people who are in an unhappy marriage currently, if they stay in it for another 5 years, are statistically very, very likely to become happy. So what is that saying? It's saying stay faithful, be committed, love your spouse come what may, just as our marriage vows indicate.